This is the new 2024 Subaru BRZ TS, and it's sort of a performance version of the newly redesigned Subaru BRZ. It starts at just over $36,000, and it's still a lightweight, fun-to-drive little sports car. Today, I'm going to review the new BRZ TS and show you all of its quirks and features. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. Cars and Bids has around 600,000 registered users, all participating in our auctions of cool, special, exciting cars like this, and this, and this, and this. If you're looking to buy or sell an enthusiast car from the modern era, do it on carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new Subaru BRZ TS. And I'm going to start with what makes the TS different and special compared to the regular BRZ. The most important items are, number one, suspension. The TS has upgraded suspension that Subaru says was tuned by STI, its performance arm, for a sportier ride, better handling, better track performance, and obviously that'll probably make the car feel firmer as well. Find out later when we drive it. But improved sport suspension over a regular BRZ. You also have better braking. The BRZ TS has Brembo brakes with larger front and rear rotors. Subaru says 12.8 inches up front, 12.4 in back, which is about an inch larger than the rotors on the standard BRZ. You also have performance brake pads to fully take advantage of your braking capabilities. Those are the two big benefits of the BRZ TS over the standard car. Other than that, on the outside, your changes are almost entirely cosmetic. You have gold brake calipers to signify the difference between a BRZ TS and a regular car, and some badging. You have a TS badge in the front grille, as you can see, another little difference, and another one on the trunk lid in back, letting people know that this isn't just a normal BRZ. Now, on the inside, the upgrades for the TS range from the expected to the kind of ridiculous. As for expected, we have blue stitching in here. You can see blue stitching on the seats and also blue stripes on the seats. Alcantara seat centers with blue striped accents. You also have blue stitching on the parking brake and in a few other places to set it apart as the sportier model. A more ridiculous change in the interior, the start button has been replaced with an STI start button. All this means is it has the STI logo on it, and it looks a little sportier, but it is just the start button. Also ridiculous in the interior, you now have STI logos in the gauge cluster, which doesn't sound too ridiculous, except that the gauge cluster is fully digital. So they just changed some software and suddenly you have an STI logo in the cluster. It's not like something placed in there specially for this car. It's just a little difference on the screen. To me, probably the most impressive change in the interior, or at least this is where you notice it, the manual transmission. The BRZ TS is only sold with a manual. You cannot get an automatic. There are not too many cars remaining in this world that are manual only, but the BRZ TS is one of them. It's a 6-speed manual, and that's a pretty impressive addition to its performance credentials. As for pricing, you might be wondering what you pay for all this TS stuff. The upgraded suspension, the STI start button. The answer is that a regular base model BRZ starts right around $31,800. A upgraded BRZ Premium starts around $33,500. A BRZ TS starts around $36,300. So you do have a little bit of a stair step in price in order to get to the BRZ TS, the top version. And by the way, it is worth pointing out that Toyota also has a version of this car for its GR86 model, which was of course co-developed with the BRZ. It's called the GR86 Performance Package. Pricing is roughly similar, but apparently suspension tuning is different. Subaru's suspension tuned by STI, Toyota's is tuned differently. Not sure which one drives better, but there are going to be some preferences on either side because the cars aren't exactly identical. Now, one place the BRZ TS has not been upgraded compared to the standard model is under the hood. You still have the exact same engine as the regular BRZ, which is a 228 horsepower, 2.4-liter flat 4, or Boxer 4 as some call it. You get under the hood, and I love how accessible everything is here. No plastic cover to cover up everything, no stuff partitioned off. You can reach and access everything, which a lot of people are going to want to do because a lot of people modify these cars. I also love that on the little plastic engine cover that does exist, you have both the Toyota and Subaru logo, recognizing the collaboration between these two brands. A lot of companies will try to hide cars when they're co-developed and not make it seem like the Toyota Supra that BMW is involved, but here they've made it clear that these two are developed together, which is fine because everybody already knows that anyway. And since we're talking about the general BRZ engine situation, let's talk about, well, the general BRZ for a minute. This car, the BRZ, was redesigned a couple of years ago for the 22 model year. It entered its second generation. Now, the first-gen BRZ was a beloved lightweight sports car, rear-wheel drive, just like this one, but there was a lot of criticism that it was low on power. This car solved at least some of that criticism. 228 horses was a boost of about 25 horsepower compared to the outgoing model. Now, the other big change, in addition to extra power, was a modernized design, a new exterior look. And I have to say, I really, really like it, which is surprising because, frankly, it looks a lot like the old BRZ with just a few little tweaks here and there, but those tweaks have managed to really modernize the look of the car. It went from being an acceptable look to, frankly, I find it pretty attractive, this new one, even though it shares the same general rough shape as the outgoing BRZ. As for interesting quirks on the outside of the BRZ, how about the fact that the headlights say BRZ on them? Both left and right headlights say BRZ in little print. I'm not sure exactly why, but if you're looking at this car from the front, well, you'll know that it's a BRZ, I guess. Another interesting quirk is this panel here over the rear wheels. You can see it sort of sticks out from the rear fender bumper cover area. That is regulatory. There's a regulation that says the rear wheels can't stick out beyond the fenders, but in the design of this car, they do. So they stick that little piece on there to comply with the regulation and make sure the rear wheel is indeed tucked inside the fender, just like the government wants. And speaking of the rear of the car, the other interesting quirk is the BRZ doesn't have a spoiler, and yet it kind of does. The trunk lid design almost gives it sort of a ducktail look. Otherwise, it would be more of a fastback coupe, but instead you have this spoiler coming off that is also the top of the trunk, and it's kind of an interesting design detail of this BRZ. But anyway, next we move inside the BRZ TS for some interesting interior quirks and features, although getting inside is kind of interesting. To unlock the doors, you press the Subaru logo on the key fob, not your typical boring unlock button. The Subaru logo begins your Subaru experience. Anyway, you climb inside and the gauge cluster does this fun little dance where it has some crosshairs and then it shows like a boxer engine working. And it's kind of a cool and clever way to do a welcome screen, one of my favorite ones that I have recently seen. By the way, on the subject of that gauge cluster, you can see the tachometer is right here in this middle circle, but if you put the car into track mode, the tachometer changes and becomes this like elevated bar graph that shows you where your engine revs are. I guess they figure this might be easier to read if you're on the racetrack. You see this a lot on higher end cars, the drive mode changing what's on the gauge cluster display, but it's kind of cool to be able to also have it in, well, a lowly BRZ by comparison. By the way, putting this car in track mode is an interesting process. There's a button in the center that has traction control off and then track, with a little checkered flag. If you press that button and hold it down, it both puts the car in track mode and turns off traction control. Now, if you just want to turn off traction control, there is a separate button for that, just to the left, where you can turn it off. Or you can also go into track mode, which not only turns off your traction control, but also changes the gauge cluster like I showed you, and gives you a more limited version of stability control in addition to the other stuff. There's a separate button for just that. It's a cool performance car touch. But anyway, on to the general interior in this car. I have to say, it's not particularly nice. It's not tremendously stylish. The materials aren't particularly high-end or high quality. It's not exactly the nicest, most luxurious place to spend time, but it never really was. Ever since the BRZ and FRS came out 10 years ago, the interior was about function and simplicity. In order to get the car to a certain price point, the interior couldn't be this beautiful symphony of materials and style. It just had to kind of give you the basics, what you need. And, well, it does exactly that. Nothing particularly unusual or exceptional in here, but a few things to note. For one, the climate controls have these kind of cool round buttons, these sort of toggle switch levers that are fun to press, and these dials right above, easy to use and not integrated into a screen. Now, directly above that, you do have the infotainment system, which is a touchscreen, although it too is only the very basics. It doesn't even include a navigation system. You don't have high-class weather apps, stuff that'll read you the news. It's none of that. You only have the very basics, although it does include Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is what most people are probably going to use anyway. With that said, one interesting thing the infotainment system does have is a birthday and anniversary reminder. Check this out. Going to settings, there's a birthday reminder section where you can add in a birthday of, say, a child, a friend, a family member, your spouse, and you can also add in an anniversary. When you do that, every time you turn on your car on those dates, the car will remind you, hey, it's so-and-so's birthday. Just in case you forgot, here's your reminder that it's your anniversary popping up on your infotainment screen. Kind of a hilarious little quirk of a lot of Subaru models, actually. I also like the fact that you do have some hard buttons on the sides of this infotainment system to adjust the stereo, the tuner, the volume, change the track, go back home, all that stuff, so you don't have to do it within the confines of the screen. That's always nice to see. Now, as for the gauge cluster screen, I already showed you some of its tricks, but worth pointing out, the screen to the furthest left is an info screen that can be adjusted to show different information about your car. You adjust it on the steering wheel, you can see various different pieces of information show up, and you can leave it on whichever screen you want, depending on what you want to see, which is nice to have. Now, in this vicinity, one thing I absolutely hate about the new BRZ and the GR86 is the turn signal situation. You put the turn signal on to go left, and then it pops back to its normal neutral position. So you push it down again to turn it off, but that doesn't turn it off, and then you push it the other way and it turns on the other turn signal, and it's just a nightmare. Weird turn signals like this that went back to neutral, they were all the rage in the mid to late 2000s, but every automaker abandoned them because people hated it. BMW was the biggest culprit, and now it's gone. But for some reason, these cars, the GR86 and the BRZ, still use this awful turn signal. I just can't stand it. It becomes infuriating. Now, as for storage in this car, of course you have a glove box, which is pretty standard. You also have cup holders, which are hidden in the center console under the center armrest. You press a button, it opens up, and there are your cup holders. Now, you will note that this is instead of a center storage compartment. You don't have storage in here, you only have cup holders. Of course, you can store stuff in here, but that will mean no cup holders. You don't get both. Such is life in a kind of compromised, kind of small performance car. It's just the way it is. Practicality isn't the main focus. Not really a surprise. In fact, there are no major surprises in here, except perhaps for the back seats. Yes, this tiny car has back seats, as you can see, just as small as you might expect, but they are there for people who absolutely need to use a little bit of practicality in a pinch. The back seats are totally decontented. Nothing happens back there. There's no climate vents, there's no roll-down windows, there's no heated seats. You don't even have blue stitching in the blue stripe like you do up front, but they're there if you absolutely have to use them. They're just really, really tiny. Now, one thing that surprisingly isn't all that tiny in the BRZ is the trunk. I'll show you in a second, but first, accessing the trunk, you can do it with a button inside near the driver's seat. You have a button on the key fob, or you get a little button back here that is cleverly hidden in this black piece of trim. The black button is kind of disguised, so it's not sticking out and looking ugly like it does in some cars. But anyway, press the button, open it up, and there's your trunk. Now, it's not huge, to be clear, but it's bigger than you might expect for a little sports car. It's not really focused on practicality, and yet it's got a decent-sized trunk. And you can fold down the back seats if you want. So if you have some larger item that you want to stick all the way through the interior, you can do it. Also, if you lift up the floor of the trunk, you can see there's a little extra storage space down here if you want it in this spare tire-shaped compartment. There is no spare tire. To be clear, if you have a flat, you're on your own, but you do get a little extra storage out of the whole situation. All right, driving the BRZ TS. Now, clearly I have not picked the best day to do this driving video, but I have had this car for quite a while now, over a week and over 100 miles of driving, so I've gotten to know it pretty well. It just so happens I'm recording this on the day that it rained. And here are my thoughts about the BRZ TS. First and foremost, I love this car. I love it in theory and I love it in practice, which is not always the case. Sometimes you hear about a car, you're not sure if it's gonna really translate well, and then it doesn't. This does. It's a small, lightweight, rear-wheel drive, simple car that behaves like a fun, little, small, lightweight, rear-wheel drive, simple sports car from back in the day. And everybody who says they don't make cars that are, enthusiast-friendly cars that are affordable anymore and approachable from a mechanical standpoint, well, I totally disagree. This is that, and the real key is now it's actually fast and fun. The previous BRZ and FRS and 86, they were great cars, but they were slow. I mean, there was no arguing, they were slow cars. Now they got more power, 230 horsepower. That's a legitimately decent number. It's still not huge, it still doesn't make them like really fast, but they are fun, they are exciting cars to drive, and they're now just fast enough that you can't really knock them for being slow. They're acceptable. But the real fun, of course, is going around corners. And all of the new GR86, all of the new BRZs are tremendously exciting to go around corners. Just as good, if not better than the old car. They corner flat, they corner hard. You can push them into corners and just feel so much confidence. The steering feel is excellent. Everything about it is really, really, really impressive. I just love to drive these cars. They are so good. And they're never gonna be like an ego play. You're never gonna have people pointing and looking at you or turning their head to see you. You know, it's not a supercar. But if you just wanna have fun for not all that much money, this is the car to do it in. Which leads me into the TS. So the TS is fun for a little bit more than not all that much money. You know, the regular one starts around 31,000 whatever. This thing at 36,000 whatever, obviously it's more expensive. And to me, it doesn't add that much more considering what it offers. Basically, from a usability perspective, I'll tell you what it adds. It makes the car more fun, but it also makes it a little bit more compromised in terms of suspension feel. It's harsher, it's rougher. It does handle a little bit better. It feels a little bit flatter and like you can go into corners with a little more strength and a little bit more confidence, but it does compromise the ride a bit. And it hit me today earlier, I was thinking about, I think that the TS is the one that you get if you want like a fun weekend car, and I think a base or a premium is what you get if you want a fun car that you can also daily. The differences are not that dramatic. You could of course daily a TS, but it's just a little bit more compromised, a little bit harsher, and you're paying up for stuff that you're not going to use on a day-to-day basis. So I feel like this is the one you would get if you want to have like the most focused version of this car from the factory for weekend use, for track use, which a lot of people do with these cars. I think that way you can justify the price premium, but otherwise I would stick with a regular one. Regardless of which you get, I would absolutely buy this car. I think it is a fantastic car for the money. The shift action is fantastic, notches right into gear, not too rubbery, not vague at all. It's easy to rev match a downshift in this car. It revs relatively quickly, and the clutch pedal is just very easy to figure out. There are just very few negatives about this car, especially at the price point. Yeah, the interior is not amazing. Yes, it could have a little bit more power. It could maybe look a little cooler. But for 31, I mean, this is a great little sports car for the money, and I just think it's tremendously enjoyable and exciting to drive. And I'm thrilled that such a car exists, And moreover, I'm thrilled that they executed it well. You could see a situation in which, like General Motors with the Kappa cars, Toyota and Subaru developed this car, they don't really do it all that well, and then they complain that enthusiasts don't buy the cars. Well, no, that's not what happened. Instead, they did execute it well. Enthusiasts did buy it. It was a home run all around. And now we're in a second generation, which has improved over the first. And I just think this is a fantastic car. I think the TS is the one you get if you want to do real, like, weekend track use driving. But generally, I really enjoy the new BRZ and the new new GR86, even more than I enjoyed their predecessors, which were also great. And so that's the new 2024 Subaru BRZ TS. There's a lot to like about the new BRZ, and it's certainly better than the outgoing model, which frankly I also liked. I'm not entirely sure that the TS justifies its price premium over other BRZ models, but this is an impressive and fun and exciting performance car. And now it's time to give the BRZ TS a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 55 out of 100, which places the BRZ TS here against rivals. It actually scores slightly lower than the regular BRZ and Toyota GR86, only because I'm not entirely convinced the TS's improvements justify its higher price tag. Still, the new BRZ and GR86 are fantastic little sports cars with amazing steering and handling, and the TS only enhances that if you're willing to spend for it. Overall, I'm completely thrilled these cars saw a second generation. The second gen models are truly great, and I love any opportunity I get to spend time behind the wheel.